Hi there.
Hey, Ann.
I didn't get that countdown quite right because I put it on loop and I was like, great, why is it returning again?
We're here now.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to this edition of Investment Grade Startups. We are your hosts, Ann Nguyen and Simmy Hundal. And Simmy, my partner in crime, would you like to share why we started this show?
For sure. It's for founders. They go through one of the most difficult journeys that you could choose for your career, and we're trying to make it slightly easier by honoring the work that they're doing, supporting the work that they're doing, and actually putting them in front of investors among other stakeholders to make that work a little bit easier. So it's for you founders.
And it was really Simmy's idea, and I'm just along for the collaborative ride. And since we both work with founders and startups in our own space, we thought this would be a great way to help founders and startups in our own way. And today we're speaking with the founders of Baritone, which is also a health tech startup. And then we're really pleased to have Gautam return as the stakeholder. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and bring everybody on screen.
Sounds great. Welcome to the party.
Hello, thank you.
Hi, everyone.
Glad to return.
Gautam, welcome back, I should say. It's really good to have you back, and thank you for supporting the program as well as the founders that you work with.
Absolutely. So I think we should get started with the round of introductions. And since I'm a familiar face, I would let the founders first take over, introduce themselves, and then I can be the last one.
Excellent. Thanks so much. We're so excited to be here. So I am Meagan, CEO and co-founder of Baritone Health. We're based out of Houston, Texas. My background is I'm a scientist by training. I studied genetics at Texas A&M. I did biotech for a few years. Went back to get a PhD at Baylor College of Medicine. And then worked in Baylor's intellectual property office for about 5 years before joining my co-founders, Onur, who's here with me today, and Britt Cross, who couldn't join. And we've been working on Baritone Health since 2021. Really excited to share what we have. Go ahead, Onur.
Hello, everyone. I'm Onur Kilic. I'm the CTO and co-founder. I have a non-medical background. I did my PhD in applied physics at Stanford, where I was working mostly on defense technologies, mostly how to detect silent submarines or make missiles more accurate. Then I had a change of heart, went to Johns Hopkins, and then started a company out of there with people at Mayo Clinic and Yale that was developing cancer therapeutics and companion diagnostics. And after that, I moved to Texas and joined Meagan and Britt, who can join us today, who is also our CMO and co-founder. Nice meeting you all.
Thank you, Onur. And you guys have got very interesting backgrounds, and Onur, specifically, your background is very interesting as well. So about me, I'm Gautam, one of the directors at GoingBC. In terms of investment, we have invested in more than 28 companies with 3 exits and a unicorn in our portfolio. And Going VC, we are not just investors, but we have been training the next generation of VCs since the last 7 years. So we have churned out more than 700 candidates, with about 66% of them working in early stage funds. And I personally have trained more than 200 investors. In terms of my background, I'm an operator turned investor. So I started my career working for SaaS companies in France, Germany, as well as US, transitioned into a limited partner role investing into venture capital funds, and then had my transition into venture capital, starting first with Quake Capital Partners. And so I am quite familiar with the ecosystem. I've seen the founder side, I've seen the venture capital side, I've also seen the limited partner side. And I love working with founders and helping them in the fundraising process. That's one of the objectives why I'm here supporting investment grade startups. It's all about me. Now let's get started with the company, Bairitone.
Yes, thank you for the introductions, everyone. So Simmy and I will take a step back so the conversation can get started. We will see you again here shortly.
Sure. So just to give a brief intro what we're working on. So Baritone Health is working on a really big problem in sleep apnea. If you're not familiar with that disease, you might know someone who snores or someone who uses a CPAP mask. But kind of when we think about obstructive sleep apnea, it's really a disease of obstruction. So normally when you're awake, you have lots of muscle tone, your airway is open and able to breathe. But what happens when you sleep is you have decreased muscle tone. Some of these structures in your upper airway, like your tongue or your epiglottis, can collapse on that airway, causing a complete closure or an apnea event. So these are events where you're actually suffocating during the night. So of course, if you're having these periods that last several seconds up to a minute, and having them hundreds of times per night potentially, and not getting oxygen into your body leads to really horrible health consequences if left untreated. So one of the major problems of sleep apnea is it's majorly underdiagnosed. A lot of people just avoid treatment because there are some really awful outcomes in this pathway. So we're kind of attacking the diagnostic side of the pathway, which we think is really ripe for innovation at this time. So one of the issues with sleep apnea is your basic diagnostic that is very highly scalable is not very, I guess, information rich. So you can kind of count how many apneas are occurring. You can set up a person to get a prescription for a CPAP machine, and it does work for a lot of people. But unfortunately, CPAP machines have about a 50% failure rate. So kind of when people are failing their CPAP machines, they're looking towards other solutions for their sleep apnea. That's when they become eligible for these other kinds of diagnostics, things that are looking for root causes of the apnea event. So actually sedating a patient, putting a scope down their nose, and seeing what structures are collapsing so you can target those specific sites. Some of diagnostic like this can get you qualified for something like a hypoglossal nerve stimulator implant. It can also actually be predictive of outcomes to other kinds of therapies that are emerging in the space. So the problem with this is that this kind of more information-rich diagnostic modality is not very scalable because you have to go into the OR to do that. So what we're building at Baritone is a way to make that very important diagnostic step a lot more scalable. So really, in short, we're building as a wearable device that goes on the cheek. It uses passive sonar sensing, AI, and cloud computing to determine what kind of collapses are happening in the airway. We present that report to the doctor, so now they have basically a map of what's going on in the airway, so they can make a treatment plan for the patient. If they know it's a back of tongue problem, they have some tools to treat that. If they know it's epiglottis or soft palate, they have other tools to treat those. So that's really in brief what we're working on. Have a really cool demo tape I'd love to show you, but I'd love for Onur to toss in anything else you'd like to discuss.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, go ahead.
Go ahead, Onur.
Meagan, go ahead. You were going to show slides, right?
Yes, I'm trying to get there. Sorry. All right. So, sorry for the technical issues, people. I'm working on it.
So yeah,
All right,
essential. All right, go ahead.
Sure. All right. Sorry about that. All right. So I really just want to show kind of the, again, I show kind of what the demo of what we want the device to look like. This is kind of a render of what it wants to look like. We think about kind of how the patient experiences it. They again get our little patch. They do a short calibration procedure, and then they go to sleep in their own bed. And in the background, what we're able to do is, again, identify when an apnea occurs, identify what kind of collapse configuration is happening in the airway using completely passive sonar sensing. And just to show an example of our working prototype, I'll play this. It doesn't have sound, but you'll see that areas of this airway, and again, this is just to orient you, this is nose, this is mouth, this is the upper airway going down into the trachea. This is actually Onur built this demo. He's initially saying some speech words, which have known areas of collapse when you're making consonant sounds, and then transitioning into making these snores and gurgles and these kind of sounds that are more typical of a patient sleeping who has sleep apnea. And you're able to see in real time that the technology that we've built, we're able to determine where those collapses are happening. And then,
Meagan, one thing. Right
Yes.
now on the screen, we were only seeing the one slide, so we are not seeing the video. Now we are able to see. So can you just go back and do the slides?
All right, so yes, this is a video of our technology working. Again, just to orient you, on the front, we have the nose, the mouth, and this entire upper airway going down into the trachea. So what we see is that a subject can say some, even with spoken words, you have these sites of collapse in the upper airway that are used to produce consonant sounds. And later on in this demo, we're also making these snores and gurgles and kind of these sounds of collapse that are more associated with apnea events, complete closures of the airway. They're then reopening. So again, you can see in real time, they were able to determine using our sonar and AI process where collapses are happening along this airway. And so again, for the doctor, what we can present is almost a summary of map of what has happened during that night of sleep, so they can understand what's going on with that patient's airway and prescribe a good treatment modality for them. Moving through this deck, I just also wanted to show, because we're in the diagnostic space, where we see ourselves positioned. Again, I kind of briefly mentioned this area of all these kind of sleep apnea treatments. A lot of people are very familiar with the CPAP, positive airway pressure options, along with all these other things that are coming on market, which are kind of alternatives to CPAP. I mentioned the hypoglossal nerve implant, a lot of major movers in this space, along with their competitors coming up. Right now, before you can even have one of these kind of treatments, you need to be qualified using an anatomy diagnostic. So of course, this is a huge bottleneck for a lot of these companies. So we think kind of as a go-to-market approach, this is something that we can really help a lot of these companies with. A lot of these other players in the market, a lot of times what they want to understand is who is responding to my therapy and who's not responding to my therapy. So I can have a really good therapeutic outcome by only targeting patients that I know that my therapy will treat them. I'll stop there. Let Gautam ask any questions.
Sure. Thanks for the pitch, Meagan. Just a minute. Okay. So the first thing is, which I want to understand, is sleep apnea is very much undiagnosed. A lot of times it doesn't, people are not able to diagnose it. They have trouble sleeping, right? So I want to understand now the user journey, right? And the different symptoms which you have, you're feeling tired and all of that. Then you go to doctors and doctors probably say that maybe you can have sleep apnea, right? And now we have to go to the diagnostic phases, right? So now when it comes to the diagnostic phases, right, that's where the dice comes in, right? So now coming back to your product, right? So this product, it's like a Band-Aid in a way, which you put in your cheeks, right? Okay.
Correct. It's a wearable, yes.
Okay. So it's a wearable, and it's going to be, so it's not just going to die out, right? So what's inside it, like the hardware, if you are comfortable sharing a little bit about like what's actually inside it.
Do you want to take that one, Onur?
Sure, I can describe a little how it works. So it basically has several sensors that are usually accelerometers that detect vibrations on tissue. So it doesn't pick up any vibrations like sound from the air. It only picks up vibrations generated within tissue and that travels in tissue. And we have 2 or 3 of these sensors, and what they do is basically using our own proprietary algorithms and AI trained on a lot of data, it is able to calculate the path that these vibrations follow when they go from the point they emanate from to the sensors. So we are able to track the path, and that path depends a lot on the local anatomy and the anatomical location. So if the anatomical location of those vibrations and the shape of the anatomy changes, we are able to track those with the AI model we have. And that way we are able to map where these vibrations are coming from. And we also, of course, time the vibrations so that we pick only vibrations that are associated with a collapse event or obstruction event, so that we can tell, okay, there's a certain type of obstruction occurring at this time point. And since they're accelerometers, we can also track things like head position and other things that will allow us to get a more granular, high-fidelity data about the patient's anatomy throughout the sleep cycle that you are not honestly able to get with other methods like DICE or even sleep MRI, which isn't very practical and very expensive.
Okay, thank you. Have you done any tests so far about the product, and what are the results and impressions of these tests?
So we are doing 2 types of tests. One type of test was shown by Meagan in the video, and what we do there is we use speech as a proxy for these collapses. Now, in sleep apnea, the airway collapses occur involuntarily, but when we speak, when we make certain consonants, we voluntarily collapse certain parts of our airways in certain shapes. So these locations and shapes are well known. So we test our algorithm, our model technology, basically to see if it can track the collapses associated with regular speech, and we can do that pretty accurately. We have around sub-centimeter resolution for that. And the second thing we are doing is we are actually testing them in parallel to DICE. So these are patients that go into the OR, then are sedated, and physician goes in with an endoscope to see what part of their airway collapses during sedation. But we are also using our technology in parallel in these initial trials to see how well it matches. We are still recruiting more and more patients. We have some data, but it will take a couple of months until we have enough data to see how well it works in sleep patients. But in speech patients and non-sleeping patients, it works pretty well so far. So it looks pretty promising.
Okay. So these days you are doing the early tests on patients in parallel, as you have stated, right? So then a couple of months you're going to have data more on this. Okay. Can you also tell me that when you will launch, after all the clinical testing it is done, what would be a price point of this? Because one of the arguments you have made for DICE is that it's quite expensive. It's like 4.7 grand, right? So what would be some price point for this product?
Thanks for that question. That's something we think about a lot. We think pricing based on what DICE costs, and basically saying we're going to reduce the cost on that because it's home use, it's more scalable, it's less kind of resource intensive for the healthcare system. Just the straight up answer, we're thinking pricing around 2,000. I'm sure you know that healthcare is a little more complex than like a consumer driven, straight consumer market. But we think that's where a reasonable price point would be.
Okay. Can you also tell me a little bit about the market numbers? We talked about it a little bit, but how many people are there who suffer from sleep apnea? What are the trends? Is it increasing? Do you have any data on that?
Yes, thanks for that question. So I'll start with the biggest number. So worldwide, about 900 million people with sleep apnea. So almost a billion people with sleep apnea, very prevalent in developed and developing nations with aging and obese populations. So US, China, India, lots of instances of sleep apnea. So kind of going back a step to US, because that's likely where we're going to launch, probably about 30 million Americans, probably only 6 million that are diagnosed, and the remainder are not diagnosed yet, need to be diagnosed. So taking a step further, people that have identified that they have sleep apnea, they have failed CPAP, and they're potentially eligible for this anatomy diagnostic, those numbers are around 600,000 patients, so 600,030 patients. So now that I've kind of drilled down to the smallest number, let me take it back, take the microscope back out. So we're thinking about our go-to-market, of course, is launching into this patient population that has failed CPAP and is looking for an alternative to that, using this more advanced anatomy diagnostic to get there. However, because within our technology, we already have built in a way to count these apneas, we could take a step backward and do the initial sleep apnea diagnosis, which is counting how many apneas occur during that overnight. And that's a matter of getting it 510K cleared to do the first sleep apnea diagnosis. We have some kind of business plan reasons why we're not taking that approach first, why we're focusing on the anatomy first. We think about the beachhead is this particular group, but then the total opportunity is anyone who has sleep apnea and needs to be diagnosed.
I want to pry on one statement which you had made about the market and specifically about the undiagnosed ones. Would you say that the vast number, and this is a very considerable number, which is not getting diagnosed, is it because of the cost and the nature of the procedure?
There's a lot of things that mean that the low diagnosis among people. Part of it is it's hard to get diagnosed. You typically, for your first diagnosis, you need to go into a sleep clinic or maybe get a home sleep test. But the first step you need to take is go to a doctor. There's also kind of a stigma around actually completing the sleep apnea diagnosis. We always, we talk to doctors and we, talk to people that are really experts in this field. You can diagnose sleep apnea because you hear someone snoring and having these gasping events. You don't really need like a detailed thing to do it. You could tell, but to actually get the formal diagnosis, to get on this care pathway, there seems to be stigma or reluctance to get on that path because outcomes are not very good. It could be because people are not aware of all the options they may have for treatment.
And a lot of people assume that they'll get a CPAP, and most people don't like that, which is understandable.
Okay. Now, in the interest of time, I would also now want to go to one of the objectives of this show, which is the investment portion, right? So I would want to know what are your fundraising plans, and after that, you can also ask me questions about what investors are looking for, or any pertinent questions which you have regarding investor perspectives.
Thank you. So right now we are supported, we have an investment from Superroom Capital, which is out on the West Coast, along with the NIH Phase 1 SBIR grant. So that's what's kind of extending our runway right now. Kind of our next fundraising stage, we're in it right now. We'd like to raise a seed round this fall into winter. We'd like to raise enough money to basically build more durable, sleeker looking prototypes so we can deploy them further outside of the Houston area, especially in light of we're getting ready for adding more data to our studies, entering into this phase 2 trial. We're going to want more prototypes to be able to collect more data. That's milestone 1. Milestone 2 is doing more of the FDA clinical development. So we have this early stage study going on, but we know that we need to be getting ready to deploy a pivotal trial. We like to deploy that in 2024, 2025. So getting that milestone done. We think it's going to be a de novo pathway. It'd be great if it was 510K. We're still exploring that option, but say that to say it's not going to be PMA or something super capital intensive. It's something that's very doable. We have a very safe, low invasive device or non-invasive device here. So anyway, short answer to your question, we're in the raise right now. We'd like to raise about $3 million. We heard that is not a good goal for a Texas-based company with couple first-time founders. So actually, I would love to hear your input on that, because if that goal is too lofty, then we think about what other milestones can we achieve with the raise that would make the company kind of de-risk and be more appealing for the next round after that. Because we have to do this FDA step at some point. So we're going to have to raise it at some point, you know?
Okay, good to know. So when it comes to fundraising, there are multiple considerations an investor is going to look at. So just that you're limited to Texas and just that you're first-time founders, that doesn't mean that you have just blown up and you are not going to get investor yeses, right? So when it comes to a 3 million round, right? So I have some portfolio companies of mine who are first-time founders, and they have raised something close to 3 million, okay? And they also didn't have the fancy big super big brand names, right? It is possibility, right? So that's not going to be one portion of it. So when we are analyzing any company, right, as an investor, the first thing I look for is your problem, right? Why you are solving this, how big is this problem, and actually is this problem a venture grade problem, meaning that not every company is actually a fit for a venture investor. Not every startup is a fit. As a venture investor, I have certain obligations to the limited partners who have given me the money, right? So I need to get that return, and I want to see whether your company is going to be a fit to generate that kind of a return, right? So for funds, usually it's between 3x to 5x, which is minimum, right? So if that's the kind of return which I would want, and my time period of holding your company is typically going to be around 6 to 7 years, right? So a typical fund is like a 10-year fund with 2 or 3 year extensions, right? Seed fund. So I would want to see whether in that time span, right, how much would you be able to commercialize, right? Meaning that would you be able to get in a range of 150 to 200 million in revenue in a time span of, let's say, 5 to 6 years, right? So if that is a possibility which I can see, then I would be very much inclined to look at other details about the company, about the problem. Now, your company is very much focused on the diagnostic, right? So I would want to pry a lot on the undiagnosis which goes on, right? What would you do to remove the stigma? What would you do to unlock this phase in your go-to-market, right? So then you can actually sell more, right? I would want to see more on your sales strategy. And specifically, I think you should stress more on the team, because team plays a key part, right? When you have less data points in super early stages like pre-seed and seed, right? I want to get that conviction whether this team can execute, right? So you need to stress more on the complementary skill set. Onur has a great set of skill set when it comes to the building. He has all the requisite markers for a CTO. But I would want to go much more deeper into understanding what's the plan to build a technology team, right? I would want to see from you, Meagan, your leadership capabilities, right? How coachable you are, whether we can build a very long-term relationship as an investor, right? So then I can guide you, because seed investors are going to stay with you for a very long period of time. So founder market fit is one aspect, but founder investor fit is also something which goes both ways, right? So these will be certain considerations which I would be looking at. And it's also going to depend on the type of investor. So if you're looking at the 3 million round, the lead investor would be looking to put in about 40% to 50%. Sometimes it can be even 30%. So someone with a check size of 1.5 million, in that range. And if the lead investor is putting in 1.5 million, anything more than $1 million, there will be consideration for board seats as well, right? And so this is how your round is going to be typically structured. You will have to go after those investors. Then you would also have to see, when it comes to your competition, right? Has that investor actually invested in such companies, and what's the inclination towards sleep apnea diagnostic, right? I would want to also know why no one else is doing it, right? So I think we are very close to time, right? But before we conclude, the name of the company, Baritone. Why is it Baritone? What's the relationship with the beer?
We like bears. There's a lot of meaning in this name. So I started telling the story about sleep apnea, how it's related to muscle tones. We have tone in there, relating to muscle tone. When you're asleep, things happen. They don't happen while you're awake. We're thinking about airflow in that upper airway, and cutting it off, causing these horrible apnea events and all this disease in a lot of people. We have this AI component. That's why we have AI instead of just BAR. Our CMO, Britt Cross, is a big fan of the baritone horn. So there's also that meaning too. So just a lot of meaning there. I'm sure you can see in our logo, we have the bear ears with those eyes making up the dots on the letter I. So yeah, it's just a name that spoke to us.
Yeah, it's mostly because people associated fluffy bears with comfortable sleep, and that's what we want people to have, basically.
I love that explanation about the name, especially the comfortable bears correlating with sleep, or the bears comfortable sleep. So thank you. Did either of you have any final questions for Gautam?
Meagan, you're muted.
I muted myself. I'm sorry. I did have a question for Gautam, but I know we're close to time. Can I ask really quick? I know you need to go.
Of course.
Sure.
Of course.
Okay. All right. So you mentioned something you said, which I've heard before. Investors want to know they're going to get their return within 6 to 7 years, and the return has to be a certain place. And we've thought about that. This is what we need to put into the company to commercialize potentially in a Series A round. But I don't really put that into my teaser deck. That's in some other level 2 deck. So should we have kind of more of the holistic story of this seed round does the clinical validation and clearance, and then this series round does the commercialization, and we're going to build the sales team, blah, blah, blah. Should that stuff be in kind of the pitch teaser deck, the first thing that an investor sees?
Okay, so when it comes to storyline, the storyline for a seed round is very different for a storyline for a Series A round, right? Your seed round is still a story about your product, your development, the big market opportunity out there. And Series A is more on the expansion side, right? So you are going into the expansion side of things. What is important to mention is in your seed round, right? If you're raising 3 million, what is the outcome after your runway? So if you're going to get a runway of 18 to 22 months, and I would advise right now, given that you are a medical device company, you're a health tech company, you do require capital extensiveness, right? And the economy, the way it is actually functioning in the venture ecosystem, you should have as much runway as possible. Okay, so about 18 to 22 months. So you should definitely state right now in your pitch that you're raising a 3 million round. After 18 to 22 months, what is going to be the outcome? Specifically, if you can have a revenue figure for that. And for now, references, what is a Series A company, right? So when it comes to a Series A company, usually a company in United States, which would be doing in good times, something around 2 million in annual recurring revenue or annual revenue, 2 million, 2.5 million. But now the times are not so good, right? And the costs have also gone up. So now what we are seeing is companies which can do somewhere between 2.5 to 4.5 million, right? So when you make a statement that you are investing as an investor 3 million in the growth of the company, so we reach 3 million at the end of 18 months or 22 months, and then we are primed for Series A, right? Because as an investor, I'm buying in the growth of the company. So when you make that statement, it makes it clear, because I would be doing my analysis and modeling to see when and what you will require to reach the different subsequent stages, at Series A, Series B, and beyond, right? Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Awesome. What a great conversation. Thank you very much. I did have one quick question. You'd mentioned the cost of the device. Is this something that you plan for insurance to be able to cover, or is this something that the patient will have to pay?
Definitely insurance to cover. $2,000 is a lot for a patient to pay out of pocket. That's another kind of nuance of medical device. In biotech, you have to run through the insurance program. I will say positive things on this. We're working with a reimbursement and regulatory consultant. This is the same firm, so we're going to have like a joint plan on regulatory and reimbursement to make sure those are aligned. Because we're doing a hardware device, even though it is a diagnostic, you can kind of follow like a DME code and get payment from selling the hardware itself, which may be a little bit of a shorter path than trying to get a new reimbursement code.
Thank you. Simmy, I think you have some final words and a message from a sponsor.
Yes. First of all, thank you so much, Gautam, Onur, Meagan. It was such a pleasure to learn more about the great work that Baritone is bringing to market and serving so many millions of people worldwide, starting with the US market. So first of all, thank you for making time. Thank you for doing what you're doing in the startup ecosystem. Gautam, this is your second time here again. Thank you so much for coming back and contributing to our program. I do have a message from a sponsor that I know well, Houston Venture Labs. So why don't we go ahead and play their message, and from Dom.
Uh-oh. It's frozen.
I can speak for him.
Hold on, let me try this again. We've had all sorts of tech issues.
I know, today's the day, isn't it? And it's not even Monday.
Would you like to share his message?
Yeah, I'm happy to. Houston Venture Labs is a co-founder venture studio here in the city of Houston, trying to serve the next generation of great digital health founders. We work with health experts that are looking for a structured program to launch their startup in order to make a difference in health outcomes. And we have 4 general partners that will start with them on day 1 of their founder journey. If you're interested in learning more, please visit us to apply to our program at houstonventurelabs.com.
Thanks, Simmy. We'll make sure that we get the URL out there. And then again, thank you, Gautam and Onur and Meagan. This was a very interesting conversation, and I'm loving seeing the advances in the devices for sleep apnea patients, right, besides the CPAP, because I know personally from my friends, that CPAP machine is definitely oftentimes a failure. If you'd like to learn more about Baritone, their URL has been on this screen this whole entire time, baritone.com. Thank you again for tuning in, everyone. Feel free to drop in any comments or questions you have as you're watching the video replay. Enjoy the rest of your afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Aaron.
Thank you, everyone.